Hej og velkommen til Göker Live, og ikke mindst velkommen til Göker Pro Days, som vi afholder i de her dage. Super dejligt, I kigger med derude. I dag skal vi møde Molly Darlington, som er en ung fotograf, der er blevet Reuters ansat og skyder sportsbilleder. Hun vil vise en række af sine billeder og blandt andet fortælle om, hvordan hun har arbejdet med det nye R3-kamera til det netop afholdte OL i Tokyo. Så en ret spændende og aktuelt snak, vi skal have omkring det her tema. Vores snak det bliver i en Zoom-opkobling med England. Molly sidder derovre, og vi kommer til at snakke engelsk af naturlige årsager med Molly, og det håber I kan leve med derude. Som medvært, der har jeg besøg af Stefan Vibe fra Canon. Stefan er lidt tættere på Canon-udstyret, og specielt R3'eren, end jeg har nået at blive. Så han vil lige byde ind med, hvis der er nogle tekniske ting, og hvis i øvrigt han har nogle spørgsmål undervejs, han vil spørge Molly om. Husk, I derude kan også stille spørgsmål på chatten, YouTube og Facebook. Det vil vi rigtig glade for, at vi får nogle af. Og vi har også lidt publikum i dag. Velkommen til jer. Det kan også være, der kommer nogle publikum fra salen, eller nogle svar fra salen, og dem forsøger vi selvfølgelig også at besvare undervejs. Det tror jeg var introen, og Molly, welcome to you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Did you have your morning coffee? I know it's a little early in England right now.
Yes, I have, don't worry.
Okay, good. All is good. You have prepared a presentation for us that will take us through your work, and I think maybe we should start looking at that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, all right.
Okay, so I am a photographer and I work for Reuters the majority of the time, and then I'm a Canon ambassador, so I also do some work for Canon. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my journey into the industry, how I got into it, and sort of the steps that I made, and all the way up until a few weeks ago when I covered the Olympics and the Paralympics in Tokyo, really. So I started photographing when I was about 16 at my local football club, which is called 1874 Northwich. And I followed them home and away probably for maybe 3 or 4 years. And this is where I sort of taught myself how to take photos of football. Football is like the main sport that I love personally. But I used a Canon, I started on a 1200D, which is a beginner's SLR. And then I moved up to a 5D, but this was all while I was working, volunteering at the local football club. The conditions at the local football clubs are, at night especially, quite dark. So it sort of came with different challenges, but if you can sort of teach yourself in the dark, then when it comes to bigger stadiums and they have nice LED lights, then it's a lot nicer to work with. While I was also with shooting for 1874 Northwich, when I moved to uni, I started photographing the uni football team as well, which again was similar conditions. They play at a place called Platt Lane, which is in Manchester. And again, the lights aren't brilliant in an evening particularly. They're just a standard AstroTurf pitch, which is also slightly different to when they're playing on the grass. The ball moves differently and all that kind of thing. So, but that again brought me experience and led to me doing some work for the university, covering the sports teams. So I did some other bits and bobs, such as like swimming and basketball and netball. But again, I sort of always went back to the football side of things. While I was at uni, I also spoke with a previous photographer from who went to my uni as well, and he was the club photographer at Bury Football Club. Bury no longer exist as a football club, but before they did finish as a team, I photographed a couple of matches when he wasn't available. So this was like my first professional football match, even though it was League 2 at the time, and this game was from Bury v Bradford. But obviously being the club photographer, you get to photograph the mascot on the pitch at the beginning of the game with the captain. And this still to this day is one of my favourite photos that I've taken, just because I love the kids' reaction to being in the middle of the pitch.
Okay. And was this picture taken, was you a pro at that time, or was it still kind of voluntary?
I was still at university.
Okay.
I was still at university when I took that.
Yeah.
And I was just covering for the club photographer who couldn't make that game.
Yeah, all right.
Also, while I was at university, an opportunity came along for me to cover a season of the Formula E, which is the electric car racing. They do this all over the world, basically. So I went to Chile, Mexico, Hong Kong, China, and then Rome, Berlin, and a few other places in Europe. So this was while I was at university. I then used this as a project at university because I wasn't spending much time at university. But I also covered, as well as the car racing side of this, I also covered like the hospitality side, which was a completely different insight into how it worked. So we had to cover like pictures like this one, for example, which obviously they're just pretty pictures that advertise the champagne company and that kind of thing. So it was basically showing what a fancy place the corporate side of it is. I much prefer the sports side, but this is what I was paid to do, and then the sports side we could sort of do in between at the practice when the actual race was on, and then the build up we did this kind of thing.
All right. And how was these pictures used? Was that for commercial use?
They were used for like advertising for the next race. So like this it might have been used in like a brochure, an online brochure, or on the website to say like, come and look at this place and you can come here for the next race, kind of thing.
Yeah. So this is a professional assignment.
Yeah. Yeah. I was still at university at this stage, but I was paid to do these assignments.
Okay. And what were you studying on university?
So I studied photography.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a 3 years BA course.
Yeah. So you were heading for photography already at that time?
Yeah.
As a way of life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even from college, I did photography, and at high school, I did it as a GCSE. But I didn't really know until college, maybe the end of college, that I wanted to do specifically sports photography. And then when I was at university, I sort of made all of my like little projects into sports.
So what inspired you to go in that direction?
I think mainly because I had a real interest for sports. Like I've grown up, I have a twin brother, and we've always been playing football at the park or cricket or like any form of sport really. So just because I love sport and then I found a love for photography, I guess I just combined the two.
Yes, okay, good.
What university did you go to?
I went to Manchester Metropolitan. It's very close to home. It's about half an hour away, so I wanted to stay close to home.
Good.
So straight from university, like pretty much the week after I finished, I went and covered the Women's World Cup. This was in France, and I think we were there for 32 days altogether. And me and another girl called Charlotte, who works for a company for Offside. I was working for a company called AMA, who I also did some shifts for while I was at university, which is what led to this. We hired a car and we booked an Airbnb between the two of us. and we basically travelled the whole of France for all that time. The first 2.5 weeks, we did a game a day, which was quite exhausting because they weren't all in the same location as well. And then after that, we obviously covered the last 16, the quarters, the semi, and the final, which was really enjoyable. Yeah, I loved it because I was with one of my friends as well, so that made it more enjoyable. But at the same time, like, it was really good for pictures, and it was my first sort of big tournament.
So what year is this?
This was 2019.
2019. Okay.
June and July of 2019.
Yeah. And what camera did you bring for that job?
So for this, I was using a 1DX Mark II.
Okay.
Yeah, a 1DX Mark II. So I had two of those, and then I was using a 400 and a 70-200 most of the time. And then sometimes we use like a 16-35 or a 24-70 for like general views or pictures of like fans arriving at the stadium, outside, and that kind of thing.
Okay. So you, at that time, you had a business that could finance that kind of equipment? Or was that from your own pocket?
No, so that was provided to me by Canon from the student program.
Okay, great. Good.
So this is just another angle of when they lifted the trophy. I guess it's good to look for different angles. The next photo is the general, we kind of lifting the trophy.
Yeah.
Like, which most people like would take. So it's just nice sometimes to look for a slightly different angle with it and be a little bit more creative, I guess. It shows a different side to it. Obviously that's the trophy, and they're all the girls' hands teaming up to the trophy, which is quite nice with the confetti in the background.
Yeah.
So while I was, sorry.
Yeah, I just comment that it's a great picture.
Thank you. So while I was at the World Cup, I got contacted by Reuters, basically offering me sort of a contract to work for them when I got back. It was pretty much a no-brainer, the decision for what they offered me. So when I got back, I started working for those, mainly covering football.
So did they approach you, or did you pitch Reuters? Or?
They approached me.
Yeah. Right.
And offered. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, they gave me a phone call. Somebody gave me a pre-warning that I was going to get a phone call, and then they gave me a phone call. So I had a good think about it while I was there, and then started when I got back.
Great.
And then you still was in university when Reuters contacted you?
No, so I finished just before I went to the World Cup. That was when I finished university in 2019. So I was pretty much ready to go full-time somewhere.
Yeah. Good.
Fantastic pictures, Molly. I'm amazed in such a young age to take those pictures. It takes many years to practice normally. So I'm very impressed, I must say.
Thank you. So this photo I really like. Is one of probably my favourite action photos. I just like the composition of it. I just like the cross of the Leicester player over the Aston Villa player. I really like how he's fallen in that one. And the rain, it's always wet in England, so it sums it up. And then of course, like we were I must have been with Reuters for about 9 months, photographing football, pretty much mainly football. We did a bit of rugby as well, and then the summer sports come in during summer. But during March, after the 9 months, that's when obviously COVID hit. And they said to me, okay, obviously some sports aren't carrying on, but can you do some news? So this was when Liverpool won the title. Now, I'm not a Liverpool fan, but it made a nice photo.
Yeah.
So for this image, obviously we all went. I think there was 3 of us from Reuters went to outside the stadium because thousands and thousands of fans turned up, and this was during COVID. So to get this photo, there was some trying to think what it's called, like a large transport crate thing that goes on the back of a lorry kind of thing. And they were sort of to the side of the stadium across the road. And me and one other chap, we climbed onto this crate, because if you're sort of amongst all this, trying to get an angle of it where you're not just blocked, especially when you're quite short like me, is quite hard. So me and this chap jumped onto the top of this crate, and that's how I took this photo. So this was taken on my 70-200, and they were obviously in front of the cop on the gate with the flares, and it was just such a better angle than being right down with them to show like a general view.
Yeah, good.
So then obviously fans weren't allowed to games, so this did that change then? Yeah. So then this was at a little club called Marine Football Club, and it's sort of Liverpool way. And they were playing in the FA Cup, and it was obviously, at the time it was quite a low tie, but the team that won this, Marine, actually played Tottenham in the next round. So here I was just trying to get a completely different angle on the game. Like some of the lower league grounds are like much more picturesque than like some of the Premier League grounds. Like this is just where fans would stand, and it's kind of like, it's obviously not got glass in the window, but it's kind of like a window view. And obviously on the other side is all the houses, their gardens back onto the ground. And when these games were on, because there was no fans, the fans were kind of knocking on the doors of the houses like, can we come in your back garden and watch? And they were watching from like sitting in the trees of the back garden and looking out, and step ladders trying to watch. And it was quite good to see just what people were doing just to try and watch like the game of football, because they couldn't get in. But yeah, this one is I really like this shot just because it's a different angle. But it took a while because it was basically waiting for someone to come close enough in the frame so that you could actually see they were playing a game of football and they weren't on the other side of the pitch.
Yeah, but that's a more editorial kind of picture. Was it used for news or for an article?
So yeah, it is editorial. Whether it was used or not, I am not entirely sure. But it's always good to show a different angle of the game. And I used my 16-35 for this, so I used a wide angle lens, which in the ground we probably wouldn't use too often.
No.
But yeah, it just shows, again, just a completely different angle of the game.
Real nice framing with the window and the houses in the background.
Yeah. It's a nice ground to work at. But when it goes dark, the lights aren't the best.
Yeah.
What type of light do you like the most working in? Because now you are in a very small stadium, but I also see pictures from bigger stadiums with challenging lights. And how is that for you in these different conditions? And how do you work, and how do you like to work?
Okay, so some of the lights, let's say, so for the Premier League, they need like a certain standard of lights. But for example, Leeds that have just came up to the Premier League, when they first came up last season, their lights were terrible. So like one side of the pitch was dark, the other side of the pitch was light, but they still had like a bit of a yellow tinge to them. Anyway, now they've upgraded to like these fantastic LED lights. And it's great to work there now. But when they're in the Championship, they don't have these like set set light, like they don't have to be a certain amount because they're not always on TV every week. So I have now upgraded to the 1DX Mark III, which is really good with light. But trying to sometimes set my white balance can be a challenge, because sometimes in these championship grounds you'll go one way and it looks like yellow, and you'll look the other way and then it'll look more blue. So trying to set that can be a challenge, but if you sort of go for the middle of the pitch, then I always find that that's best, because chances are they're going to be near enough the centre of the pitch when they're going to score a goal. Like they might be a little bit to one side, a little bit to the other, but they're not going to be right in the corner or right out on the line. So yeah, that's probably the best way that I would set the white balance, is go for like the centre of the pitch and use the goalposts as your white point.
Okay.
So this was during lockdown. This guy is called John, and he's a Burnley fan. And he goes to every game home of colours. Anyway, when we were this was the first game of football back after they'd like took a long pause and postponed it for a while. And we got in touch with him. I think it was just on Facebook, and we asked him what he would be doing for the first game back. Obviously, people couldn't go out to the pub and stuff, but so he was like, "Oh, I'm just watching it at home, but I'm still getting ready as I would for a match." So we were like, "Oh," so I said, "Can I come and photograph you getting ready, kind of thing, for the match?" So here he is getting ready, having his head painted by his daughter. While he had a puppy, he was holding on to one of the puppies that they had running around. And this was in his house in Burnley, which was a really small house, and it was chaos in there. There were so many people in there. It was, the atmosphere of it was just kind of perfect for the photo that I wanted to create, really.
And football on the TV set.
With the gown as well, the hospital gown. I'm not sure where he got that from.
Great.
But yeah, it's just a different angle. Again, it was in lockdown, so it shows what people were up to kind of in lockdown. That's kind of what we were doing the whole time during lockdown.
Yeah.
When we were covering news and stuff as well, it was just like, what are people doing that's different to normal?
Yeah.
How has it been with now working for Reuters, but mostly under COVID-19? How has that been? So you signed with Reuters in 19, and 6 months later, COVID came. How has that been working for you under those circumstances?
So thankfully they kept me on, and they kept me busy. So we were covering like things such as, I have some photos coming up, I think, for news-wise, and so they kept us busy in the fact that they did, like, they said, okay, so what's changed today? Like, okay, shops can't open, so we have to go to the town centre, or like, so maybe there's a local lockdown in Leicester, so we've got to go to Leicester and take photos of the fact that no one can walk the streets of Leicester and it's like dead quiet. Like, for example, in a town close to me, there was a lady who was usually like a Zumba teacher, and she came out on the streets with a big speaker, and everyone came outside their houses and was dancing to Zumba, and she'd teach a Zumba class on the street just to keep everybody occupied because they were all shut up in the houses. So like little things like that, and this kind of thing made the news because everybody was like, well, we're all locked down, what do we do now? So it was little things like that which were really, and it was quite enjoyable to see as well. And then we were sort of seeing who was still working. So like I went to a tomato farm where they were obviously struggling because they usually used workers who came in from Europe to help pick the tomatoes, and they couldn't come into the country because they couldn't enter. So yeah, little things like that. Like, they made really interesting photos, and I would have never ever done it before. Like, if you'd have asked me about being a tomato farm taking photos of news story, then I'd probably laughed at you. But but yeah, so they have kept us busy, which is good, really good, because I know some freelancers who only photograph football. Like, obviously they struggled when there was no football on, and the restrictions of getting into football grounds, they lowered the amount of photographers that could get in. We were on like a pool system, so all of the wire agencies, 2 people from out of the 6 wire agencies would get in to each game, and then we'd have to all share our pictures, and that was like every Premier League game, which was obviously hard, but that's changed now and gone back to normal, thankfully. This was a news story, obviously during COVID, which was very big, with Rashford and the school meals. This is about 25 minutes away from me, drive. So I saw this online, on Twitter, actually. The people that wrote the sign posted it, saying that they'd put it up, and they're called like a they're like a Wythenshawe group. So I got in my car and drove and went to photograph it, because I thought it's bound to be ripped down, or it might be vandalized, or somebody will disagree with it. So I photographed that, and coincidentally, that isn't my dad with a red umbrella. It is just a guy walking past with a red umbrella, which looked quite nice next to the Rashford, which was in red.
So you didn't arrange him to walk there? He just came there. Okay.
No, it was just a coincidence. But it did work quite nice, I thought.
Yes,
so yeah. Good. So yeah, this was a big story, obviously, in England, and carried on to be a big story. So then, this was obviously when there was no fans. They stuck cardboard cutouts of fans, and that's actually the manager. So he just sat amongst the stands. It was during the warm-ups, and he just went and sat up there to watch the warm-ups. But I just thought it was quite funny, because he's just sat amongst a bunch of cardboard cutout people. So another thing we did during lockdown was the fact that obviously the Olympics was postponed in 2020. So we reached out to some athletes who were supposed to be going to the Olympics, and we sort of asked them how they were training, because they couldn't go to training sessions because everywhere was closed and there was this lockdown. So this was a trampoliner. She's called Bryony, and she actually won bronze at the Olympics this year. And this is how she was practicing and training in her back garden in Sheffield.
Okay.
So yeah,
very limited space.
Interesting. Very, very, and it was very interesting to see that she was just on this tiny little trampoline, bouncing onto a cushion of a chair. So yeah, some of those were really interesting to see as well, and it kind of like gave you a hope that they're still training, so we are still going, hopefully, and it's still going to go ahead in a year's time, kind of thing. But yeah, it was really, it was just interesting to see that kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
This again was still during lockdown, but it was December last year, so the end of the year, when things may have been a little bit more flexible. We had a few days snow, which is very rare for in England these days. Coincidentally, I'd already arranged this lady. She does husky I guess, husky racing. But she does it not in the snow. She does it like in the forest and stuff like that, even when it's not snowing. Anyway, I got in touch with her because somebody said, like, oh, it'll make a great photo. So I was like, okay, we'll arrange it for the end of December. And coincidentally, we got all this snow. So it made it was really nice photos, obviously, because huskies in the snow is better than huskies not in the snow. So this was just a little feature. So we'd sometimes do little features on certain things, like if they just make nice photos. And so I did like a whole piece on this of when they arrived with the huskies getting ready to kind of getting their harnesses on and that kind of thing, to her racing and going around the track. And yeah, it made, because like it made a couple of the papers just as a nice feature story kind of thing, which is always nice. It's just quite an enjoyable thing to do when you do a nice little feature on something.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, we got one question, and it's regarding one of the previous pictures. I think it's regarding the picture you shot through the window at the football stadium. And
Okay.
you're asked, how do you avoid reflections in the window when you do a shot like that?
Okay, so there wasn't actually any glass.
There wasn't any glass. That's okay.
No, it was just like a window.
Yeah.
It was like more of a frame than an actual glass window.
Okay, good.
So I probably wouldn't have avoided reflections in that kind of shot if there was glass there.
No.
But obviously, if you do want to shoot through glass, I'd probably suggest getting as close to the glass as possible. And you can buy like a sort of rubber lens hood kind of thing that goes over and prevents any light coming in from either side. Or if you don't want to buy anything, you can get a black sheet and put it over your head, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Thank you.
So this was just a rugby game. During COVID, we were allowed to go in the stands and kind of go, like, because there was no fans, we could get a different angle on the game and all that and that kind of thing, which was quite nice. Just again, a little bit of sun and shadows can make a completely different photo than if it was just a line out and they were catching the ball. But the next images are from like the news that we took on during the lockdown. So this was from the 75th memorial of I want to say it's called VJ Day, and they did. This was it's in the Arboretum in Stoke. And this was obviously Prince Charles and Camilla during the minute silence of it. The light was quite hard here because we were like amongst the trees, and obviously the sun was out a little bit, but it was kind of casting shadows light. But it was a completely new job to me. I have never done this kind of thing before I did it. And these are all what they call pool jobs. So they come on a rota. And so the rota is the fact that like each wire agency takes it in turns. So Reuters will get one, then PA will get one, then Getty will get one, then AFP will get one, and it kind of goes round like that. And then all the photos are shared just so there's not loads of photographers all running around in an important event. So the next image was the same system as that. And obviously this is Boris Johnson taking a coronavirus test.
So that means, Molly, that the pool jobs, you will get any kind of assignments, not sport, but news and...
news, yeah. So this is kind of the news system that I was new to completely but when there wasn't any sport on, we covered the news. And some of these jobs came along. Not too often. I only did a handful of them. But but yeah, when they did come along, they're obviously quite important because you're the only photographer there, and you're providing it for all of the wire agencies, and they weren't all as interesting as this one.
Yeah. Okay. Molly, I think I got one more question, but I have some. I have to have some help from Facebook. I can't see it here from the screen. Maybe Mette can help me. Ellers så kan du bare sige den til mig. Ja.
We got a question on Facebook. How much do you have to work with your pics after the shot?
Okay, this is an interesting one because we don't really so for high level sport, so Premier League and above, we send it off camera to a desk and they edit for us in London, and then they'll send out the photos just for a matter of speed, really. But for example, like features and things like that, I will have a little edit myself and then send them all out together after the event. But when we edit, we don't touch them really much at all. We do a crop, maybe a straighten, maybe a slight lighten or darken if it needs it, and then just a little bit if the colour balance is slightly off. But other than that, we don't really touch it at all. So yeah, very limited, just because like that's kind of the editorial unwritten rules, that you don't really edit too much. Is pretty much as it comes off the camera.
And how about your news assignments now with the Boris Johnson picture?
Yeah, so again, that goes to the desk in London.
Okay.
Just straight off the camera. Just as a matter of speed, again, they need the pictures as soon as possible for the papers and all that kind of thing. I might do an edit myself afterwards if I want it just for myself. Or if I'm going to use it to, I don't know, enter a competition or something, then I might do a little edit if it just needs a lighten or a darken or that kind of thing. But generally, I don't really edit many of my pictures at all. It's just the football below the Premier League, so the Championship and that kind of thing, that I have to send and caption myself. So that would consist of a crop, a straighten, maybe a lighten or darken, but just all really basic, simple things. Nothing too much at all.
So you will deliver a raw file to Reuters, or what kind of?
No, we just shoot everything in JPEG, because we can't send it on the FTP. If it's raw, it's too big of a file for them to take in everything as raw.
Okay. But all the pictures you shoot, will they end at Reuters, or will you keep some of the pictures for your? So
I keep them all. I keep them all myself. I back everything up on a hard drive myself.
Okay.
And then so I do have a copy of the images if I want to do, like, for example, enter a competition or an awards or something like that, or print anything off if I've got a picture that I really like, or like I can do all that myself because I do keep a copy of them.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they are all, so we can access them on the Reuters backup as well if we delete them for any reason, and we do need them.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
So this lady, this was a place in Manchester, and this was when they were struggling for NHS scrubs. So this lady was making them in like so this place usually makes kind of clothing for certain brands. So they changed their factory basically to make scrubs, and this is her in the middle of piles of clothes that she's made in the process of making. And yeah, in this kind of factory area setting, and it was just because of during lockdown. So again, it was just another little news story that kind of made nice photos, and was of quite interest at the time. And this little girl, this was another Memorial Day. I can't remember what I want to say it was. I'm not sure. It was another Memorial Day for something in England. And this street, particularly, they all came out. After this photo taken, they all came out and they were all dressed in like Victorian clothing, and they all had tables just outside the houses because obviously they couldn't socialise properly. And they sort of had like a little street party, socially distanced and all that kind of thing. But this little girl just made, running down the street again, just made like a nice little story of what was going on. And I guess it was a feature. It was kind of a feature, but more news. But the principle of it was that it was like a nice little. I spent like the day there and just spent some time with them all, and it was just quite a nice like little event to be a part of. That made nice photos again. Yep. Like so when we were in the lockdown, it was kind of all about just make some nice photos, but again, then we have to tick the boxes so we can do these nice photos, and then like the next day we can go into town and tick some boxes that like shops are closing down, or this company's gone bust, or like just little things about that were in the news and in the headline. And then we'd go and do this kind of thing, which wasn't quite in the news, but it would make a nice news story if somebody picked it up. Before I went to Tokyo, obviously things were still the same. We were still in some sort of lockdown. Sport hadn't returned to usual, but then obviously this season it has, but that started while I was away. So when we went to Tokyo, this was the... Pardon?
Molly, I'm just curious. Now you mentioned Tokyo, and you had a long product journey with Canon from ES 1200D to 5D, 1DX Mark II, 1DX Mark III at the moment. And then now you were the chosen one in Tokyo to try out the ES R3. And I hope there are some viewers that are curious about that experience and waiting to hear some words from you on how that experience was.
Okay, so for the Olympics, I wasn't the chosen one, but for the Paralympics, we did get to use the R3. And it's a very, I won't say it's so I used it just before I went away as well, for something different. But when I was using it at the Paralympics, it was a very different way of working, I want to say. And I noticed that because we were so busy, and because we kind of came into, we started the Paralympics and we had this new camera and we were like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? So we got it like a couple of days before. We set it up with Canon while we were out there. And it's a very good camera. I do like it, but it takes a bit of getting used to, I think. Like the first few days, I was like, I was working with the focus, and I was like, I took a shot, and it was of the Great Britain wheelchair racer, and I didn't have the artificial sound on. I just had it silent, and I photographed the whole race. And afterwards, I thought, I've just seen that whole race. I've missed it all. And I was like, oh no, I've just completely messed up like the biggest GB athlete that's at the Paralympics, and I've just missed a whole race. Anyway, then I went back, and obviously I had took it, but I completely forgot that I was on the mirrorless, so I could see everything happening in front of me. But yeah, no. When we were doing like so we were doing like tennis and the fencing and all that kind of thing. So obviously the silent shutter is like amazing for it, because it just like they can't hear that you're taking a photo, so they can't look at you like in like real disagreement that you're taking a photo at the wrong time when they're about to serve or when they're about to start their fight, and you can't distract them because you can't distract them with the noise because they can't hear it. So yeah, that was definitely my favorite thing, the noise about the R3. But again, the focusing was really good to track the different sports. I covered a lot of sports that I haven't photographed before, so to compare it to the other camera was kind of difficult in that way because I hadn't used the other camera for that sport before. But it did track really well in like the table tennis. The eye tracking was really good. And then I'm trying to think what other sports I've got here. And then the racing and like the judo, when they were like moving quite quickly, that was also, it also really helped. And the working the dark light is really good, really good. Because I've done like, obviously from the non-league football kind of thing, I've done a lot of work in dark, dingy light. And definitely if you whack the ISO up a little bit, you can't notice it half as much, the noise. So yeah, it is very good. So this was back to my Mark III. I started on the Mark III while I was there, and this was the first game I covered. And this game, because it wasn't in Tokyo, it was only Tokyo that was in a state of emergency. So this was in a place called Miyagi, and this picture, they were allowed fans, but a very small, limited amount. So this was just a young fan before the match with his mask on, just kind of watching them warm up. But I just thought it was really cute, really. And it obviously all the empty seats around it as well kind of just told the story of we're in Japan and no one's really allowed to come and watch, but they were to this game, but only a very limited number. And then also like we had to kind of, so some of the sports we could play around with a little bit. So this one, for example, I used like a longer shutter speed of about, I think this was on half a second. And it just allows like a little bit of movement in some of the sports. So this obviously was fencing. And I went up in the stands to take this just to get the Tokyo 2020. Everywhere was branded Tokyo 2020, even though it happened in 21. Which was a little bit confusing at times, but yeah, this is just a bit of a different angle, and it just makes it a little bit more arty and interesting. But we obviously do have to tick the boxes of like we need a photo of this guy, and then after we've kind of done that, we can then have a play around and do some more like arty photos and like play about short speeds. And because I always find with a longer shutter speed, it takes me probably about 200 shots before I actually get one that I might like. So yeah, especially the movement, because they all move in different ways, so you have to have them like moving that way, and he's coming towards him, and then the GB hat is in focus, and then he's moving outwards. So yeah, there's a lot more to it, but then other people might like a different version. But yeah, this was my favorite one from the fencing. And then obviously because there was no crowds, we had this nice dark background to play with. I mean, there's the odd light there, but that was mainly just to light up the fences, basically. So yeah, that was also really nice to look out for when shooting it. So this was a swimming, and again, after we've done the main people, we can play around with the shutter speeds. So here we did a little bit of panning. Again, my shutter speed on this was not half a second, but it was probably, just looking, about 1/10 of a second. So here I found this quite hard with the swimming, trying to get a pan, because trying to get it in focus with the water not splashing all over the face as well kind of made it like quite a bit harder. And I've done swimming before, but I've done it at a university level, but I haven't done it like obviously at higher competition level. So we were using a 600 lens for this, which again, I haven't used a 600 before. But for the swimming, it definitely helped, because otherwise we were sort of too far away from them, because we were sat at the side and we were a little bit raised. And if you didn't quite have the 600, then the 400 was a little bit too wide, and you would have had to crop in a lot more. But again, just a different angle. And then the next one as well is just a slightly different angle of, we sort of, anything to show that it's the Olympics and get the Olympic branding in, just because if it's got that in, then it sort of gives it a bit of context, rather than here's a swimmer, he could be anywhere. Obviously, you have to get those kind of shots as well, just for a picture of that person. But it's also nice to get in some of like the Tokyo 2020 or the Olympic rings, just to show, oh, this is him competing at the Olympics, or that kind of thing. This shot is actually one of my favorites from the actual Olympics. It was a remote, so in some sports, especially football, we use a remote, and I have a 1DX Mark II as my remote, and then we use two pocket wizards. We put one on the remote and one on my handheld camera that I've got in my hand, and we set it up before they're competing, obviously before the horses come round. So here I've pre-focused on the middle of the jump, like on the bar, I used a 16 to 35 on this. Oh, obviously a wide angle, because obviously I'm really close to the jump. You have to tuck it in like behind the flowers, so it's kind of disguised for TV as well, which is always like a little bit of a challenge. So yeah, this one, and then as they're jumping over the specific jump, then I trigger the remote. But they didn't all look like this. A lot of them had the horse's nose chopped off, or the rider was behind the jump on the left, and like, so yeah, it was just a couple of them that came out like where they were just in the right position. But yeah, it was quite nice, because it was sort of as the sun was going down as well, so the sky was nice as well.
Very
and
nice.
It's just sort of showing a bit of context, like with the Japanese dolls, as well, just like it's in Japan and this is the kind of jump that we're going for. So yeah.
Did you use any additional light for the close-up area?
No, we can't put any lights, any lights on. Just the remote is the only thing that can go down, really.
Okay. Molly, I have some question in more general. When you were told to go to the Olympic Games, what was your thoughts? I think that must be the biggest job you have ever been assigned to. Did you have any colleagues you could follow, or were you just sent out there on your own and said, go there and go there?
So no, I did have some colleagues with me.
Yeah.
There was, from the UK, there was maybe 9 or 10 of us that went. So I have like a mentor at Reuters, who I kind of go to with any issues, or if I need any help, or basically anything photo related, really, anything Reuters related. And he went, and then another colleague, who's the only other girl in the UK, she went as well. And then my boss went. So there was like plenty of people that if I needed any help or guidance, like I could ask and go to. Yeah.
Okay. How is the atmosphere with other photographers? Are you helping each other, or are you kind of competing when you're sitting there waiting for a sport event?
I think, well, I'm all for helping anybody, and I would rather make friends than enemies at these kind of places. But there was a lot of UK photographers that I knew already going out there that I photographed football and sit next to at the football with.
Okay.
So there was people that I knew, and friends through work that were there as well. So yeah, no, obviously you're competing to get your photos out first if you've got the shot that you think that everybody needs and everybody wants. But at the same time, like, it's nice to be able to see people out there that you know, especially when you're on such like unfamiliar ground.
Yeah.
Like people are there to help you, and if you need anything, then yeah.
Okay. How was your preparation before the Olympic Games regarding equipment, for instance? Did you have a double check on everything and erase your cards and so on?
Yeah. So everything that I normally use, we were told just to take everything that we've got out. So I took everything that I would normally use for a football match out. Obviously, I did cover some football while I was out there as well. So that was quite familiar to me, other than some days that we had to do more than one game at a time, which is quite hard work, carrying the cameras for that kind of long. But then when we got there, we were told that if we needed anything from the Canon desk, or if, like, we could go and ask, and you can loan it for you can loan it out from them for the duration. Anything that we borrowed for the Olympics, we had to give back, but then we could go to them for the Paralympics a couple of weeks later and then take out exactly the same if we needed and wanted it again.
Okay. Did you have any technical issues with any of the equipment? Yeah, I know Canon is listening. No, you didn't. No. Okay,
no.
good.
No, I didn't. And I was going to say, and then when we got the R3s, I didn't have any issues with them either. I know a couple of guys. It steamed up a little bit when it was raining, but some of the guys were in torrential rain at the cycling, which I was glad I avoided.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
So you were 4 weeks in Tokyo, or 5 maybe?
No. So I was there for 8.5 weeks.
8.5 weeks. Wow.
Yeah, because we had to stay. Well, everybody from Reuters that was staying for the Paralympics, we all stayed in between, because otherwise we would have had to go through the quarantine again. And when we got there, we had to do 4 hard days quarantine, which meant we couldn't leave the hotel room. And then for the first 14 days, including those 4 days, so the 10 days after, we had to do what was called a modified quarantine, where we could only go to work and then come back to the hotel. So, but we couldn't use public transport. We had to use designated media buses.
Yeah.
So if we'd have gone home and come back, we'd have had to go through all that again. So it was kind of easier for us to just stay out there in between. And then we did sort of some like newsy kind of pictures in between. There was a couple of bits and bobs that we did, and then some nice little featurey things as well. I think there's a few of those coming up in my slide as well. Yeah. But we did have some free time as well, where we were allowed to we had to stay around Tokyo, but we could do what we want and see a few different things.
Good.
That's some reliable gear you have brought with you then.
Yes.
Yeah. So this was the horse jumping. I went again. It was the same one as my remote. But when I got to the horse jumping, I was like, this is absolutely terrible. I couldn't find a picture at all. I was trying so hard to get a nice picture and to get a nice background, and I was getting so frustrated because it was so messy and I just couldn't find a nice picture at all. And then once I got into it a little bit and I'd been there for about an hour, I sort of chilled out a little bit and I found this picture and I thought it was quite nice. It kind of got rid of any background that we didn't want, because obviously it was just empty seats, and as much as empty seats show that there's nobody there, for every photo, it's not the nicest background in the world to have. So this kind of just made it a little bit better, and it just kind of it showed the horse jumping for what it is, rather than an empty stadium and someone going around the course just with nothing around it.
Mm-hmm.
We then did the synchronized swimming, which obviously I found it quite hard. There was just, so the synchronized swimming that I did was just the two, so it was just a duo, rather than the whole, rather than like 8 people in a group. So this obviously the aim is to show that they're doing the same thing in this kind of thing, which is what this image shows here, but they don't always, when you capture it on a still, look like they're doing exactly the same thing, even though they might when you're watching it. So that was quite hard to kind of like choose which pictures to send out for that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then the diving, this was the same day as the synchronized swimming, so we did kind of 2 different things. And this was kind of one of my favorite things, actually. I really enjoyed it. The background's nice, nice and dark. Obviously there's the Tokyo above the diver who was jumping off the board, so this was taken from like the side rather than front on. And this girl here, she was 14 years old, and she was from China, but she won gold. And I think she must be like one of the youngest ever to win like gold at 14 years of age, and she was just incredible. She scored like 10 across the board, like every time she jumped.
Yeah.
And then this is again just using a long shutter speed, just trying to make something a bit more creative. They do 6 jumps each, so by the time they're on like the 4th jump each, you actually want to do something different and not just take the same jump over and over again. So yeah, this didn't always work. It didn't always make a nice shape. But yeah, we had a good play around with the longer shutter speeds of the diving, just to try and make something a little bit different. And then this was sort of the news side of things, like for in between. This was like, so there was a temple called Sensoji, which is the place that we went to, and all the girls kind of dress up in nice kimonos and like get really dressed up for going there. So it was really nice for photos, and they don't really mind having the photo taken either. Like a lot of them, if you ask them, oh, can you pose here or can you do this, like yeah, okay, we'll do that. So yeah, that was also really nice. And I think the next one, yeah, so here they are, they're just kind of posing in front of the temple. The light I thought was quite nice. The sun was setting, it's a little bit burnt out at the top, but it still worked quite nice. And again, it's just showing a different angle, because the Tokyo, we have a couple of photographers in Tokyo, and I always think they see this kind of thing every day, but we don't. So we look at it from a different angle when we're there. So yeah, they kind of told us, if you're taking any nice photos, then just send them in, and they can go on the wire for features or for anything that kind of wants to use them.
Mm-hmm.
And then this was the sunset from the top of the tower in Tokyo, the sky tree. That again, it was just trying to make a nice photo from what we were up to and what we were doing, which just shows a different angle. Then after we had our time off, which seemed to go the longest, I think because we weren't that busy and we couldn't leave Tokyo, we were sort of trying to pass the time a bit quicker. But when we started the Paralympics, time flew by because we were so busy. And we were doing like 2 sports a day, because so when we cover the Olympics, there's so many photographers, maybe 60. But when we covered the Paralympics, the team was like lowered to like 8 people. So obviously trying to cover as much as 60 is impossible, but we were still trying to cover as much as we possibly could. So this was actually during the training. So going to the training sort of can make different photos because they're not all lined up for racing, and like there's less restrictions. You can kind of have a good wander around while they're training. You don't have to be sat in your specific position from the word go kind of thing. So this was a swimmer from Russia, and obviously he had no arms. So the way that he like set himself off in the pool was his trainer is stood on the other side, holding the other end of the towel, and then he's holding on with his mouth to set off for the race kind of thing. And then this is Hannah Cockcroft, who is the GB wheelchair. This is the race that I thought I'd completely missed, but I hadn't, thankfully.
So that's shot with the R3?
Yeah, all of these are shot with the R3 now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then this is the fence. This was the wheelchair fencing. Obviously, again, we've got the really nice backgrounds in the fact that everything's blacked out, which makes it a much nicer background. And this lady, she had no arms and no legs. So the way that she fenced was she had like a prosthetic on from her elbow to where her hand would have been. And then she had the sword placed into the prosthetic. And then that's how she fenced, and she actually won gold. And it was just a really nice moment to capture. And again, because it's so dark when they kind of come round afterwards to see the families and stuff, it's still dark round the edge where they go and see their families. So obviously the R3, I could just whack up the ISO a little bit, and it still performed well. And these are some of the table tennis pictures, which again, the place that we were photographing in, it looked a bit messy in the background. So we were obviously trying to get rid of any kind of mess. Like there was screens with scores and names on and stuff, which we were trying to avoid. And then the teams were sort of sat behind them, which again, it was okay, but it sort of made it a bit messy with the colours in the background as well. So this guy is from Egypt, and he was just absolutely incredible. But one of my colleagues was like, "You must have spent ages trying to get that ball over his eye," and I was like, "No, it was a complete like surprise." I was just stood at the side and hoping for him to chuck it up, and then when it covered his eye, I was like, yeah, that looks great, but I can't lie and say that I practiced to try and get it there. It just happened in one of the frames. So this is another example of like a long shot speed. Again, this was about half a second, and it's the judo. So we actually, to get the black all the way around at the side and the back, at top it was just black, but obviously it looks like I've kind of got rid of the legs, and there was like a board that we had to sit behind, and if you just move the camera down slightly when you're trying to shoot over the board, it kind of gives that effect of the black all the way around, and it just frames it quite nicely. So yeah, the long shutter again just shows the movement in the sport, rather than just a static still photo, which works, but again, it just gives a slightly different angle on it.
Absolutely.
And then this was the closing ceremony. So obviously, it was very dark around the stadium. We took this from the top of another building, and there was a glass barrier, but we shot over the top of the glass barrier using a tripod, and I set my shutter to about a second for this, and then obviously the fireworks, we were told what time they were going to go off, and just I used again a pocket wizard to set it off, just because I didn't want to shake the camera when I was pressing the button or anything like that. So I triggered it with a remote, and then this was the result of the long shutter, which worked quite nicely. It kind of looks like a crown on top of the stadium. But yeah, it was a nice photo to finish with, because obviously this was like the last photo I took before I went home. So yeah, and then we handed the R3s back.
Yes. And went for some vacation afterwards.
Yeah, I had a couple of weeks off.
Yeah,
but I just wanted to stay at home. Home food, home bed.
Yeah, very good. Okay, Molly, thank you very much for inspiring presentation. It was very interesting. What is your next big job waiting?
Oh, I'm not sure yet. I've got football this week, but it's not very exciting.
Okay. Good, very good. I think we will wrap up now. No more questions. So thank you so much, Molly, for joining us.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for showing some very, very nice pictures.
Thank you.
Good. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Yes, og til jer derude, tak fordi I kiggede med. Jeg kigger herover på det her kamera nu. Og husk, hvis I ser med live, så er vi på igen om 2 timer med Nikolaj Linares, som viser billeder fra hans sidste par år. Også skudt med, eller i hvert fald har haft arbejde med R3'eren. Og hvis I ikke ser med live, så gå ind på vores YouTube-kanal og find udsendelsen derinde. Der ligger de alle sammen på stribe. Og tak til dig, Stefan, for at være med. Og endnu en gang tak, fordi I kiggede med derude. Tak for nu. Hej.